And I think you guys should be able to see me here. I hope. Hope the camera angle's okay. Okay, I think Twitch is up. Just waiting. And I think this definitely should be copyright-free music because last time I said it was copyright, but it was not a strike, which was awesome because that would have been not great. Okay, I got 0 viewers. That's Twitch. I'm live on Twitch, y'all. The setup is actually a lot easier than I thought it would be. I shouldn't have put it up for all these years, really. Open YouTube. I think my wife's in the hot tub right now. Her name is Jenny. I am the blind husband. I'm using voiceover to obviously use my iPhone. Hi, Jenny, if you're listening. I don't think you're listening, but I hope you're listening. That'd be awesome. Even when you're not with me, then you could be with me right here, seeing what I'm doing. Well, oh my God, this is painful. All right, let me focus here. There we go. Just had to test the YouTube, yo. One, two, three. Okay, so we know that's a little behind. That is totally cool. All right. So where we're at in the story right now is we're just character building a little bit. Still in the tutorial phase, obviously. Just teaching people what Adam, what his universe looks like. We've been introduced to Danielle, Frederick. Frederick is of course the ruler of the planet. He's the governor of the planet. And we are going to be introducing some new characters in this particular episode. So I hope you guys enjoy. And I'm just going to put, I think, this on screen. So that should be good enough. And I think let's get started. Let me pause the music. All right. And
Speech on.
that's my voice, my newly recorded voice.
044
I just got to go to my.
via VLC. Files. Messages. Notes. Active.
There we go.
Note lingering. To type. Checklist. Off. Back but. Share. August 16th. Note. To the heavy blast doors. Note. To the heavy blast doors of the executive suite hissed shut behind
Enjoy.
Daniel, sealing out the sterile ozone-laced air of the Grand Hall and the lingering, suffocating dread of Governor Frederick's threat. Here, deep within her private office, the atmosphere was quiet, chilled to a crisp artificial perfection. She walked across the expanse of dark, reflective flooring, her heels clicking a sharp, unforgiving rhythm that echoed against the minimalist walls. She did not stop until she reached the far wall, that towering wall of pristine transparent steel that curved outward and offered a dizzying, panoramic view stretching for thousands of kilometers across the upper atmosphere. Outside, a blinding sea of unbroken white clouds rolled beneath the endless expanse of the upper sky, glowing with the harsh, unfiltered brilliance of a sun that never reached the toxic depths below. From this height, the endless industrial sprawl, the grinding misery, and the billions of lives trapped in the perpetual gray gloom of the lower arcologies were completely invisible, erased by a comforting blanket of vapor. It was a view designed to make the rulers of this world forget that anything existed outside their pristine bubble. But for Danielle, the view served a very different purpose. It was a towering, silent reminder of how far she had fallen, and how fiercely she had fought just to keep from plunging back down into the dark. She placed her palms flat against the cold, transparent steel, feeling the faint, high-frequency vibration of the tower's structural supports hum to her fingertips. At 22 years of age, she carried herself with the hard, impenetrable armor of someone twice her years. In the 6 vicious years since her life had fractured, she had learned that weakness was a fatal sentence, that hesitation was a slow death, and that trust was a currency spent only by fools. Every promotion, every cleared ledger, every rival she had outmaneuvered or quietly discredited along the administrative ladder had been purchased with a piece of her soul. She had stepped over ambitions, crushed alliances, and worn 1,000 compliant smiles to claw her way out of the industrial gutters and into the governor's inner circle. Yet, standing here in the silence of her office, the hard exterior wavered. The vast, empty horizon triggered something dangerous. It unlocked a door she kept firmly bolted shut, pulling her thoughts backward across the cold, unforgiving void of hyperspace to a world she had not seen in a lifetime. Verdun. Just hearing the name in the quiet chambers of her mind brought an immediate, physical ache to her chest. A sudden rush of sensory memories so vivid they nearly overwhelmed the sterile scent of her office. Verdun was not an industrial wasteland choked by sulfur and steel. It was a masterpiece of living green and deep sapphire, a vibrant, breathing world where the oceans rolled in gentle, sun-warmed tides against white sand beaches and where vast, emerald forests stretched from horizon to horizon, humming with life. The air there did not taste of burnt oil and synthetic ash. It tasted of damp earth, sweet flowering vines, and crisp, salt-laden breezes that rustled through the broad-leafed canopies. She closed her eyes, and for a fleeting, agonizing second, she wasn't standing in a steel and glass tower on a forgotten outer-rim trading world. She was young again, running barefoot through the sun-dappled clearings of the southern continent, the warm soil giving way beneath her toes. She could hear the melodic, flute-like calls of native canopy birds echoing through the upper branches, and she could feel the careless, boundless freedom of a girl who believed the entire galaxy was laid out before her like an open treasure map. And in almost every memory of those golden days, Genji was right beside her. Genji. The very thought of him pulled a tight, painful knot into her throat. He had been her closest friend, a boy whose mind worked in ways ordinary people could never comprehend. While other children spent their days playing in the rivers or racing through the dense undergrowth, Genji was always tearing things apart. He had an uncanny, almost magical affinity for technology. Give him a broken wrist comms unit, a shattered atmospheric probe, or a rusted agricultural drone, and within an hour he would have the casing off, his fingers moving with surgical precision, rewiring circuits and boosting power outputs until the machine did things its creators never intended. She remembered the time they found an ancient, pre-collapsed atmospheric sensor half buried in the mud near the edge of a freshwater lake. It was dead, its power core long since rotted into useless slide, its internal processors fried by centuries of moisture. Most kids would have tossed it back into the water or used it as a skipping stone. Not Genji. His eyes had lit up with that brilliant, fierce spark of pure curiosity that defined everything he did. He had hauled the heavy metal cylinder back to his family's workshop, a rustic open-air shed smelling of pine resin and ozone, and spent 3 days straight without sleep, scavenging parts from old water pumps and weaving together a crude, makeshift power bridge using copper wire and salvaged crystal shards. When he finally flipped the toggle switch, the dead machine didn't just turn on. It projected a holographic map of the entire planetary watershed, shimmering in vivid blue light across the wooden workbench, illuminating his grime, streaked face and wide, astonished eyes. He wasn't doing it for money, and he wasn't doing it for prestige. He did it simply because he had to know how things worked, because he viewed the broken, discarded pieces of the universe as puzzles waiting to be solved. He was fiercely inquisitive, endlessly inventive, and possessed a laugh that could cut through the heaviest gloom. They had spent countless hours sitting on the high rocky bluffs overlooking the Sapphire Sea, dreaming of the day they would build a ship of their own, leave Fairden behind, and plunge into the stars to see what lay beyond the horizon. Then reality had intervened, sharp and brutal. The grand adventure had started with promise. Danielle's family had pulled every credit they possessed to secure passage on an aging, mid-tier transport vessel, buying into the glittering promises of economic expansion in the outer sectors. They were supposed to find fortune, establish a thriving trade enterprise, and eventually send for Genji once they had carved out their piece of the galaxy. But the universe did not care about childhood dreams. Halfway through the transit route, deep in unmapped drift space, the transport's primary reactor suffered a catastrophic, cascading containment failure. The ship dropped out of hyperspace violently, tearing its own internal bulkheads apart and leaving them drifting in the cold, silent dark of dead space for weeks with failing life support. By the time an automated salvage tug finally hauled the drifting, battered hulk into port, Danielle's parents were gone, claimed by the toxic radiation leaks that had slowly poisoned the lower decks during the drift. She had survived, but she was entirely alone, stranded on this bleak industrial nightmare of a planet with no credits, no connections, and no way back home. The sleek, beautiful transports she had dreamed of riding had vanished, replaced by the crushing reality of the arcology's vertical slums. To avoid being swallowed by the flooded, crime-ridden ground floors, she had scrubbed her accent, buried her past, and traded her innocence for ambition. She had learned to lie, to manipulate, to smile while twisting the knife, climbing over every obstacle with the same fierce, survival-driven determination that Genji had once applied to fixing broken machines. She opened her eyes, staring out at the blinding white clouds. The nostalgia faded, replaced once again by the cold, calculating focus of her current reality. She had survived.
If there's actually 3 people here watching this across YouTube and Twitch, I really appreciate it. Thanks, guys. I don't know who you 3 are, but thank you.
By refusing to look back, by refusing to let weakness compromise her position. Yet, despite all her efforts to wall off her past, a strange and unsettling
Hi, how are you, Timpulus? Tinthilus? from Twitch. I've been Pete motivated me to get my streaming game set up, so I finally got text to speech going. I can monitor on my other iPhone, and just testing this idea out. Hopefully, it works out nicely. So I hope you enjoy.
Coincidence had begun to gnaw at the back of her mind over the past few standard cycles.
Do you recognize the voice that's doing the text to speech there? And I think you should be able to see me too. Hi, it's Muda.
My guess as to why I did it requires the Windows screen reader can't do multiple things at once.
Hey, boy gaming,
Nat
do you
streaming
hear that?
4225 says Twitch. Boy gaming
You
2855.
hear that?
Has been
It's
stopped.
working.
Gustion stream and IDK if you're
Hey,
on
thanks for
IDK.
watching,
Or
by the
ATM
way, though.
IDK.
I appreciate it, boy gaming. I don't know if it's reading it out on your end, though, but I can't hear it. So that's the main thing. As long as I can hear what you're saying, that's what I really care about. Whether you guys hear it on the chat, I think guess you can read it on the screen, so it's not a big deal. Maybe less distracting if I'm reading a book here. I can't have text to speech interrupting every 2 minutes, right? So let's continue.
It started with the whispered reports from the middle tire maintenance supervisors, casual mentions of an elusive, unrecorded kid living down in the lower shafts who had an impossible knack for repairing defunct hardware with practically nothing. A shadow in the rust, someone who slipped through sealed maintenance hatches using hand-tooled bypass tools that shouldn't have existed, bringing dead circuit boards back to life with scavenged copper and sheer ingenuity. But it was
All right, so some technical stuff. Through what is it? Caster Labs. Wait, if I had Caster, okay, so fine. Here, 1 second. No, I can't do this right now, but if this phone was connected to that, then you would hear it. But if that's like I was just streaming and I just wanted to have text to speech like interact with you guys constantly, right? If that's all the streaming, my wife was here or something, then sure you would be able to hear it. But right now, the main thing is I am right now just trying to I'm playing something, right? So my story here. So that's why you can't hear the chat, but I can hear it, which is what's important to me right now. But if I was in the portable web app there, then it would be reading it. But I like this way better anyway. So you guys aren't like bombarded with a whole bunch of text messages, right?
just a technical skill that
And Void Gaming, I'm not using what you sent, by the way. Just it was a huge 100 megabyte exe, and I don't know if I'm gonna run that on my computer. My computer already kind of really sucks, so really can't risk messing it up.
caught her attention. It was something deeper, a haunting echo she couldn't quite shake. The security logs and informant descriptions painted a picture of a human boy, roughly 10 to 12 years old, with light brown skin, an intense, restless curiosity in his eyes, and an innate, uncanny genius for electronics. Every time she heard a report of this unknown child working miracles with discarded wiring and flickering data pads, a phantom image of Genji sitting at his workbench unfair and flashed behind her eyes. It was impossible, of course. Genji was light years away on a green planet.
No, I really appreciate you going through that work. Uh, but I like transparency, like all these things. I just literally step by step. You install the things you need, don't install stuff you don't. But I do appreciate your work, and hopefully it is helping other people out there, though.
She would likely never see again, living a life untouched by this industrial hell. But the parallel was too striking to ignore, a ghost from her past reaching out across the vertical gulf of the arcology.
Tell me though, are you able to read the chat on screen though when I have this up right now? I guess you guys were able to see what you're saying. That popped up probably on my screen. I'm not sure though. Again, it's a work in progress. You can't read it? Oh, that sucks. Cool. Can you see me? You see me waving at you? Wildly? No? I have a camera here, but I don't know if it's working. Perfect. Yes. Thanks for testing. I really appreciate it. Cool. All right. Cool. Let's continue.
Danielle shook her head sharply, dismissing the sentimentality before it could take root. This wasn't a time for ghosts or childhood memories. She had a massive crisis on her hands, a looming deadline imposed by a paranoid tyrant, and a week to find a scapegoat or face the executioner's blade. She turned away from the pen.
You do that, and I will use it. And thank you, Tinfilus.
Ceramic window, her heels clicking sharply against the floor as she strode toward her desk to access the security archives. If there was a clever, tech-savvy kid running through the service tunnels of the lower levels, perhaps he was the exact piece she needed on her board to
I appreciate you dropping in. You're one of my first few viewers, actually, so thank you. Bye.
solve the governor's crisis and secure her own survival. Adam hung suspended in the suffocating gloom, 200 feet above a pitch-black industrial chasm, his weight anchored entirely by a fraying length of synthetic fiber cord lashed around a rusted structural beam overhead. The air here was no longer just damp. It was thick, rolling with a stifling wave of radiant heat exhaled by hidden generator manifolds buried deep within the arcology's spine. Every breath tasted of scorched copper and ionized sweat, burning the back of his throat as the metallic din of the lower levels morphed into a continuous, deafening industrial roar. Deep in the abyss beneath him, massive hydraulic presses hammered in a sluggish, rhythmic cadence, sending heavy vibrations shattering up through the cables and rattling his teeth. He swung his legs out over the void, his boots kicking against empty space as a violent surge of vertigo struck him. The sheer scale of the vertical drop was sickening, a dizzying vertical ocean of shadows.
You know what? Since you're here, I'm gonna tell you. It's in the first video I did post. It's about a 17 minute. So it's a guy named Adam, spelled Adum, which is my name, Muda, spelled backwards. It's kind of like a mix between Star Wars, Star Trek, all the big, like Arthur C. Clarke and just all the big stories and big universes. I'm gonna try to kind of pull in aspects of each. I've probably read over like 10,000 books in my life, and I think it's about time to start to use some of that knowledge. So yeah, it's a kid named Adam. He's very poor, lives in about 2 kilometers below the rich people on this planet, which is just mostly smog, like just horrible. But the top, 1% or 0.1% live in like above the clouds in a kilometer long tower. He is right now he built his own little data device, or he found one, he had to repair it. And this is a journey of him trying to kind of do that. It's also role playing in the sense that when I'm not here on chat, I kind of iron out the story, tell her what I want to see next happen. And then in the future, I hope that the audience will get to play as well. There's a lady named Danielle. She's 22 years old. She is a high upcomer in the politics of this planet. There's a guy named Frederick. He's like a 400-pound alien. He runs everything. He thinks he's the boss until other bosses come in, obviously. Uh, and Adam does have two parents. They're working like 15-hour days he's a welder or a plasma welder or whatever, and then she works in a factory. But obviously, just like any other story, there's stuff to be discovered. So that's his backstory. This planet doesn't even have a name yet, actually. But Faradun is where Danielle comes from, and it's not really said where all the other characters come from. So, but you know what? You guys could add the backstory, and then I could add it to the story later. How about that? Whoever watches the stream later as well. So I guess now you guys have a little bit of backstory. Thank you.
Lingering, lingering, suffocating dread of Governor Frederick's threat. Here, deep within her private office, the atmosphere was quiet, chilled to a crisp artificial perfection. She walked across the expanse of dark, reflective.
And I think I'm gonna enjoy doing this. In my regular job, I work like 11 hours a day at an office, sitting exactly right here where you see me right now, like 11 hours a day. So if I could do something on the side just for a little fun, and build my own story, and yes, it's done using Gemini. I'm not a great writer, but I have great ideas, and if I can get my stories really ironed out and sounding nice, then I think people would enjoy hopefully watching it, and me talk about it. and gives me a distraction away from my everyday. So it's great.
200 feet above a pitch black industrial chasm, his weight anchored entirely by a fraying length of synthetic fiber cord lashed around a rusted structural beam overhead. The air here was no longer just damp, it was thick, rolling with a stifling.
Well, okay, so if you've read the Foundation series and seen the show, like that is an industrial planet, right? And that's like the capital. So kind of like a little bit of that, the darkness and just like, planet being destroyed. And then obviously, Coruscant from Star Wars, gotta bring that in. I love the themes on that planet. There's so much to discover. Like if you were to write a story and you could dig through like the lower levels, upper levels, the historical sections, just so much to do. Um, there's probably a few other things in my head that are like stuck because I read so much. So whatever comes into it, right? But I know there's so many planets that you get themes from so many different authors out there. So whatever people enjoy, hopefully.
200 feet above a pitch black industrial chasm, his weight anchored entirely by a fraying length of synthetic fiber cord lashed around a rusted structural beam overhead. The air here was no longer just damp, it was thick, rolling with a stifling wave of radiant heat exhaled by hidden
Bro,
generator manifolds buried deep
how
within
could
the
I
earth.
forget Doom? Yes, yes, absolutely. I read all the books, even the ones that were written by like his sons, I think. Um, Herbert something. I'm bad with author names 'cause I read a bunch, but yeah, so many good technological themes. And I like kind of the survival aspect of stuff too. So we'll see how much survival stuff we can add in here too. And I can't play video games. I was thinking about like streaming a video game, buying a game console, and I realized I really wouldn't enjoy that. I'd just be struggling and distracted. This way I can just kind of like write my own story. It's like playing a game because I'm choosing what happens next. So, like Pete said, choose your own adventures. That really got me thinking about it. Like, yeah, why can't I choose my own adventures? So that's kind of what I'm doing now.
Ology's spine, every breath tasted of scorched copper and ionized sweat, burning the back of his throat as the metallic din of the lower levels morphed into a continuous, deafening industrial roar. Deep in the abyss beneath him, massive hydraulic presses hammered in a sluggish, rhythmic cadence, sending heavy vibrations shuddering up through the cables and rattling his teeth. He swung his legs out over the void, his boots kicking against empty space as a violent surge of vertigo struck him. The sheer scale of the vertical drop was sickening, a dizzying vertical ocean of shadows where the faint neon glow of the lower bazaar looked like dying embers at the bottom of a well. He didn't look down. Instead, he forced his focus upward onto the next terrifying leg of his climb, a chaotic, tangled web of high-voltage wiring, stripped conduits, and jagged metal gussets jetting out from the sheer arcology wall. 50 feet above, releasing the primary line, Adam scrambled onto the vertical trellis of cables, his fingers finding purchase on the slicked, hot insulation of thick power trunks. The wiring hummed violently beneath his palms, alive with surging current that made his skin prickle with static electricity. Every handhold was a gamble against greased metal and snapping strands, the heat intensifying with every foot he gained as he clawed his way higher toward a small, reinforced service platform bolted into the bulkhead. Reaching the platform, Adam hauled himself over the lip, his chest heaving as he gulped down the searing, ozone-heavy air. From this vantage point, his objective lay across a treacherous expanse, a narrow utility bridge spanning 200 feet of empty space directly toward an access hatch on the opposite wall. The bridge was barely 2 feet wide, fitted with only a single rusted safety railing meant exclusively for maintenance droids on magnetic treads. To anyone else, it was a death trap, but Adam had walked this razor-thin span a dozen times before. As the furnace-like blast of nearby exhaust vents washed over his back, pushing note echoed
What did I do?
here. Deep note here. Deep within her private office, the atmosphere was quiet, chilled to a crisp artificial
Ah,
perfection. The
shit.
atmosphere was artificial perfection. Page 3 of 79.
Hold on,
Page,
hold
page,
on,
page
hold on,
6 of
hold on.
79. Page 7 of 79. Fleeting. Agonizing second, she closed her eyes. Page 9 of 80. Comms unit. Shattered. Page 14 of 82. Transit route. Deep in. Unmapped drift space. The Note unmapped drift space. The transport's primary reactor suffered a catastrophic, cascading containment failure. The ship dropped out of hyperspace. Back. She opened her eyes, staring.
I think I destroyed something. We'll try to fix it. It's gonna be a minute.
Tech savvy kid running. Page 19 of 83. A picture of a human boy. Page 17 of 83. Cool. Weakness compromise her.
We could try this voice
Survived
if
by
you guys
refusing to
want.
look. Page 15 of 83. Gone. Claimed by the toxic. Note. Gone. Claimed by the toxic radiation leaks that had slowly poisoned the lower decks during the drift. She had survived. Page 12 of 83. Didn't know how things worked. Page 10 of 83. Since was dead. Its power core long. Vertical scroll bar. 83. Note buried in the mud near the. Page 9 of 83. Undergrowth. Gangi was misspelled. Page 12 of 83. Know how things worked. Links. Live rec describe headings. Contain toggle screen record voices. Sounds. Punctuation. Ducking amount. Audio duck. Speech volume. 100. Speaking rate. 55%.
55%
Know
maybe?
how things worked. Page 15 of 83. Gone. Claimed by the toxic. Page 18 of 83. Slip through sealed. Maintenance hatches using. Hand
I think
tool
this is
bypass
it.
tools that.
As close as I
Maintenance
could get.
hatches using. Note. Slip through sealed maintenance hatches using hand tool bypass tools that shouldn't have existed. Bringing dead circuit boards back to life with scavenged copper and sheer ingenuity. But it wasn't just the technical skill that caught her attention. It was something deeper, a haunting echo she couldn't quite shake. The security logs and informant descriptions painted a picture of a human boy, roughly 10 to 12 years old, with light brown skin, an intense, restless curiosity in his eyes, and an innate, uncanny genius for electronics. Every time she heard a report of this unknown child working miracles with discarded wiring and flickering datapumps, a phantom image of Gangi sitting at his workbench on Faradon flashed behind her eyes. It was impossible, of course. Gangi was light years away on a green planet she would likely never see again, living a life untouched by this industrial hell. But the parallel was too striking to ignore, a ghost from her past reaching out across the vertical gulf of the arcology. Danielle shook her head sharply, dismissing the sentimentality before it could take root. This wasn't the time for ghosts or childhood memories. She had a massive crisis on her hands, a looming deadline imposed by a paranoid tyrant, and a week to find a scapegoat or face the executioner's blade. She turned away from the panoramic window, her heels clicking sharply against the floor as she strode toward her desk to access the security archives. If there was a clever, tech-savvy kid running through the service tunnels of the lower levels, perhaps he was the exact piece she needed on her board to solve the governor's crisis and secure her own survival. A dumb hung suspended in the suffocating gloom, 200 feet above a pitch-black industrial chasm. His weight anchored entirely by a fraying length of synthetic fiber cord lashed around a rusted structural beam overhead. The air here was no longer just damp. It was thick, roiling with a stifling wave of radiant heat exhaled by hidden generator manifolds buried deep within the arcology's spine. Every breath tasted of
I just
scorched
gotta
copper
make
and
sure I don't
ionized
touch
sweat,
that phone
burning the
now.
back of his throat as the metallic din of the lower levels morphed into a continuous, deafening industrial roar. Deep in the abyss beneath him, massive hydraulic presses hammered in a sluggish, rhythmic cadence, sending heavy vibrations shuddering up through the cables and rattling his teeth. He swung his legs out over the void, his boots kicking against empty space as a violent surge of vertigo struck him. The sheer scale of the vertical drop was sickening, a dizzying vertical ocean of shadows where the faint neon glow of the lower bazaar looked like dying embers at the bottom of a well. He didn't look down. Instead, he forced his focus upward onto the next terrifying leg of his climb, a chaotic, tangled web of high-voltage wiring, stripped conduits, and jagged metal gussets jutting out from the sheer arcology wall, 50 feet
Sorry,
above.
obviously went a
Releasing
little
the
bit
primary
back,
line,
so
a dump
my
scrambled onto
apologies.
the vertical
But I need
trellis
to
of
figure out a
cables,
better way
his
to,
fingers
to do
finding
this in the
purchase on the
future.
slick, hot insulation of thick power trunks. The wiring hummed violently beneath his palms, alive with surging current that made his skin prickle with static electricity. Every handhold was a gamble against greased metal and snapping strands, the heat intensifying with every foot he gained as he clawed his way higher toward a small, reinforced service platform bolted into the bulkhead. Reaching the platform, Adam hauled himself over the lip, his chest heaving as he gulped down the searing, ozone-heavy air. From this vantage point, his objective lay across a treacherous expanse, a narrow utility bridge spanning 200 feet of empty space directly toward an access hatch on the opposite wall. The bridge was barely 2 feet wide, fitted with only a single, rusted safety railing meant exclusively for maintenance droids on magnetic treads. To anyone else, it was a death trap. But Adam had walked this razor-thin span a dozen times before, as the furnace-like blast of nearby exhaust vents washed over his back, pushing the ambient temperature into the high 90s. He stepped onto the narrow span. His boots found their familiar, rhythmic stride on the gridiron floor, the single railing vibrating under his white-knuckled grip as he crossed the dizzying chasm with practiced, desperate precision toward the override panel that would grant him access to the sector's hidden interior. Adam pressed his back flat against the freezing corrugated steel of the bulkhead, the vibrating hum of the utility bridge fading beneath the relentless, metallic heartbeat of the Arcology's internal machinery. Before him sat the prize, a heavy, resist maintenance hatch sealed tight by a matte black biometric locking plate that pulsed with a faint, amber warning light. This wasn't just a physical barrier of reinforced alloy, it was a digital gatekeeper wired directly into the Arcology's lower tier subnetwork, guarding the classified internal service arteries that spider-webbed across the vertical city. For an ordinary scavenger, this door was the end of the line, but Adam was carrying the cracked dataput he had dragged out of the recycling chute yesterday, a piece of salvage that had undergone a crude, underground metamorphosis in his hands. He pulled the battered device from his pocket, his thumb brushing over the flickering green display that cast an eerie, emerald glow across his hollow, soot-streaked cheeks. As a level 1 netrunner in the brutal survival school of the streets, Adam's digital penetration abilities were raw, primitive, and terrifyingly risky. He didn't have sleek, military-grade cyberdex or clean, fiber optic jack-in ports. Instead, his toolkit consisted of a frayed hand-tooled interface cable wired directly into the dataput stripped auxiliary bus. To hack a door meant physically bridging the dataput into the local maintenance terminal's exposed data conduit, exposing his rig to the raw, unfiltered threat of the Arcology's automated defensive countermeasures. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird as he knelt before the lock. The air here smelled heavily of melting wire insulation and stagnant grease, thick enough to choke on. With trembling fingers, Adam stripped the rubber shielding off the end of his interface cable, exposing a tangle of hair-thin copper filaments. He leaned forward, squinting through the gloom at the micro port beneath the lock plate, and carefully jammed the copper strands into the data pins. Instantly, the dataput in his hand vibrated violently. The flickering green screen dissolved into a cascading waterfall of raw hexadecimal code, scrolling past at a dizzying speed. Adam bit his lower lip hard enough to draw a bead of copper-tasting blood. At his level, his penetration abilities were strictly limited to low-security administrative relays, the kinds of basic locks used to seal off empty utility shafts and discarded storage bays. He couldn't crack military-grade encryption or slip past hardened firewall protocols. One wrong command, one mistimed loop in his crude bypass script, and the local defense matrix would flag the intrusion instantly. And when the system flagged an intruder, it didn't send human guards. The thought alone made his stomach twist into a hard, freezing knot. If the automated security grid detected his unauthorized digital signature probing its subroutines, it would instantly dispatch a squad of perimeter defense drones from the ceiling nests overhead. These weren't sluggish inspection units, they were sleek, lethal hunters equipped with heavy stunt sockets designed to lock up human nervous systems with high-voltage arcs, and devastating plasma rotators capable of melting through solid steel, or a human chest, in less than a second. If they caught him out here on this narrow ledge with nowhere to run, he wouldn't even have time to scream before he was reduced to a smoking heap of ash tumbling down into the dark abyss. He watched the screen with wide, unblinking eyes. The amber light on the hatch pulsed faster, shifting from a steady glow to an aggressive, stuttering flash. The security demon was pushing back, actively hunting the foreign code bleeding into its port. A wall of crimson warning text flashed across the bottom of the dataput. Access denied. Anomaly detected in Sector 4B. Panic surged through Adam's veins, hot and sharp. The system was locking down. The countdown to a lethal counterstrike had begun. In 3 seconds, the automated defense protocols would trace the feedback loop straight down the cable and fry his dataput, and probably his nervous system along with it. Don't panic. Just bypass the handshake protocol, he told himself, his mind racing back to the countless hours he had spent reverse engineering fried circuit boards in the dark. Instead of fighting the firewall head-on, Adam executed a dirty, brute force routing trick he had learned from an old, half-mad data smuggler 3 tiers down. He severed the primary data line on his screen, manually short-circuiting the dataput's half-charged power cell to dump a massive, unregulated surge of raw voltage directly back down the interface cable. It was a suicidal gamble. If he miscalculated the resistance, the feedback would blow up the dataput in his hands, searing his fingers to the bone. He slammed his thumb down on the execution command. A sharp, electric snap echoed in the cramped alcove, accompanied by a blinding flash of blue-white light that singed his eyebrows. The dataput went completely dead in his grip, the green screen blinking out into total blackness. Adam gasped, dropping the smoking device onto the metal grating, his hands recoiling as if he had touched a glowing plasma coil. For a horrifying second, he thought he had failed, that he had just destroyed his only prized possession for nothing. Then, deep within the bulkhead, came a heavy, mechanical clunk. The amber light on the biometric plate flickered violently, turned a solid, welcoming green, and with a hiss of escaping pressurized air, the massive heavy-duty maintenance hatch slowly slid inward, revealing the dark, cavernous service tunnel beyond. Adam let out a long, shuddering breath that felt like it had been trapped in his lungs for an hour. His hands were shaking uncontrollably, his skin slick with a cold layer of nervous sweat that contrasted sharply with the radiating heat of the Arcology walls. He snatched up the darkened dataput from the floor, pocketing it alongside a salvaged micro power regulator, and without wasting a single second, he scrambled through the newly opened threshold, diving headfirst into the shadows just as the distant, whirring whine of automated defense drones spooling up echoed from the upper ceiling vents. Deep within the dark, labyrinthine arteries of the service tunnel, the air was dead and heavy with the metallic tang of cooling oil and ancient dust. Shadows clung to the rusted steel ribs of the corridor, parting only to reveal a tall, gaunt figure hunched under a brutal burden. Slung across the man's broad back was a coarse, heavy sack containing an irregular, bulky device that clinked dully with every strained step he took. He moved with a frantic, jerky gait, his long limbs casting erratic shapes against the curved walls. Every metallic paying of cooling pipes, every distant groan of the arcology's shifting framework made him freeze. His head whipped back and forth, eyes wide and bloodshot in the dim emergency lighting, tracking non-existent pursuers. Yet, beneath the terror that threatened to choke him, a cold, unyielding resolve anchored his movements. He knew what was at stake. He knew the purpose of his clandestine mission. Buried deep inside the sack was a damp-sealed relay module designed to interface directly with the primary security perimeter system. It would sit dormant, an invisible sleeper cell wired into the digital nervous system of the station, waiting patiently for a precise future moment. When activated, it would bypass the central subroutines and silently unlock a specific vault door, a classified target whose contents remained a mystery even to him. His handlers had given him only one directive, and the heavy weight of that responsibility was the only thing keeping his trembling legs moving forward. Suddenly, a sharp scrape of a boot echoed ahead. The tall man sucked in a sharp breath, ducking instinctively behind a massive junction pillar. Just around the curve of the tunnel, a maintenance technician carrying a diagnostic kit stepped out from across corridor, intending to check a failing pressure valve. The technician froze, his eyes widening in sheer shock at the sight of an unauthorized intruder lurking in the restricted service conduits. Without a second thought, the worker's hand darted toward the emergency alert console mounted on the bulkhead, fingers clawing for the manual alarm trigger that would bring down blast doors and automated security teams within seconds. There was no time for hesitation, no room for mercy. Thousands of lives, and the entire future hanging on this mission, flashed before the tall man's mind. With blinding speed, he dropped the heavy sack, his hand sweeping down to snatch a jagged, foot-long shard of rusted structural metal from the floor. Before the technician's fingers could slap the red alarm plate, the tall man lunged forward out of the shadows. The improvised blade swept in a swift, brutal arc, cutting short the worker's startled gasp and bringing him down instantly onto the cold, grease-stained grating. The tall man didn't look back, breathing heavily, his heart hammering against his ribs. He shouldered his heavy burden once again and plunged deeper into the dark, labyrinthine corridor toward his destination. The tall man moved through the labyrinth of the inner service conduit with the terrifying efficiency of a seasoned operative. Unlike the clumsy, brute force intrusions common among street scavengers, he was a level 10 technological penetrator, a master of digital and mechanical infiltration whose very presence in the system was treated by the arcology's defenses as a ghost in the machine. He did not hack, he negotiated with the architecture. Pausing before the primary junction box of the sector's security perimeter system, he pulled a compact, matte black bypass unit from his belt and pressed its integrated magnetic clamp directly against the reinforced casing. A soft, melodic chime rippled through the cold metal of the conduit, signaling the immediate collapse of the junction's encryption protocols. The station's firewalls didn't fight him, they rolled over like docile beasts, recognizing his high-level authorization signature as an administrative command. With fluid, practiced motions, he unlatched the heavy steel panel, exposing the dense nest of glowing fiber optic cables and pulsing power relays within. He slid his custom-built sleeper device into the heart of the junction, wiring it directly into the core data bus. The installation was seamless, silent, and instantaneous. The device clicked into place, locking its physical housing with a permanent magnetic seal and burying its digital payload deep within the subroutines where it would remain completely dormant, waiting for the precise future moment when it would unlock that heavily guarded vault door. Without lingering for a fraction of a second, the tall man shouldered his empty sack, spun around, and melted back into the shadows of the conduit, leaving behind no trace of his passage except for a ghost code that hummed quietly in the dark. Miles away, wrapped in the suffocating heat and perpetual industrial heartbeat of the lower maintenance shafts, Adam navigated the twisting corridors with the instinct of a rat running a familiar maze. His lungs burned slightly from the stale, ozone-heavy air, but his hands moved with absolute confidence. By tracking a series of faint, deliberate scratch marks and glowing paint tags he had carved into the rusted metal ribs during previous expeditions, he bypassed the dead end grates and hazardous steam vents that had stopped other scavengers in their tracks. Within minutes, he had pushed past a rusted security flap into a sprawling section of the arcology he had never explored before. He stepped out into what had once been an old residential unit, a cramped modular block suspended within the vertical superstructure that had been abruptly sealed off and abandoned a decade ago during a catastrophic sector breakdown. When the power had been permanently cut to this quadrant 5 years back, time had effectively stopped here. The air was dead, cold, and heavy with the scent of undisturbed dust and decaying polymers. Adam swept the beam of his makeshift flashlight across the decayed interior. The scene looked frozen in a tragic state of sudden interruption. A small, grease-stained table still held chipped synthetic cups and a child's worn plastic toy, while clothing hung limp from rusted wall hooks, rotting away into gray threads. The bunks were stripped and covered in a thick blanket of soot, and every digital display on the walls was dead and dark. Yet, for a scavenger, this tomb was a treasure trove. Because the sector had been sealed off and forgotten for years, the scavengers of the the lower levels had never looted it. Everything left behind by the panicked residents a decade ago was still sitting right where they had dropped it. Moving quietly across the warped floor plating, Adam approached a resist entertainment and communication console embedded in the bulkhead. Its casing was cracked, but its internal components were protected from the corrosive moisture of the open shafts. With careful, reverent fingers, he unscrewed the front faceplate and pulled out what he had been searching for, a small, intact residential communicator unit. He popped open its casing, carefully extracting the pristine micro data bridge connector and the auxiliary power regulation node nestled inside. He held the two salvage pieces up to the dim glow of his flashlight, a victorious grin breaking across his soot-streaked face. These were the exact components he needed to repair his cracked datapad. With the micro power regulator and the clean data bridge secured, he could finally finish rebuilding his primary tool and unlock a whole new tier of digital capabilities. As Adam carefully stowed the salvage components into his worn jacket pocket, the ambient hum of the arcology seemed to fade for a moment, replaced by the crisp, familiar interface of the system's underlying mechanics. Welcome to the progression matrix. It is time to break the fourth wall for a brief moment and look under the hood at how Adam's survival translates into tangible progression in this world. By successfully executing a high-stakes digital break-in against a live security lock, pulling off complex micro-repairs in the field without getting caught by lethal automated drones, and navigating extreme environmental hazards, Adam has accumulated a substantial pool of experience points. Every narrow escape and clever workaround yields measurable growth in this brutal vertical ecosystem. Let us examine his current character building tree and skill sets as he hits this critical milestone in his journey. Bullet level, 2 Scavenger Netrunner hybrid experience points, XP, 1450/2000 to level 3 core attribute scores, Dexterity, 14, enhanced by years of narrow escapes, tightrope walking across utility bridges, and scaling vertical cable webs intelligence, 15, driven by self-taught electronics repair, reverse engineering fried circuit boards, and decoding low-level security scripts, stealth, 13, refined by the absolute necessity of staying invisible to local enforcers, scrap dealers, and automated defense grids endurance, 12, forged through navigating extreme heat, toxic air, and exhausting physical climbs, active skill tree and abilities, low-level digital penetration, rank 2, allows for the bypassing of basic biometric door locks, residential terminals, and auxiliary maintenance relays using improvised copper interfaces and cracked datapads, vulnerable to high tire countermeasures, scrap engineering, rank 3, mastery in salvaging, stripping, and repurposing dead technology, military-grade wire scraps, and defunct power cells into working improvised tools, vertical traversing, rank 2, proficiency in scaling high-altitude industrial structures, utilizing maintenance cables, and managing severe vertigo under high-stress conditions. Shadow evasion, rank 1, passive skill granting a minor bonus to stealth checks when operating within unlit service tunnels and avoiding automated drone sensor sweeps. The primary objective of this current campaign arc is simple yet perilous. Adam must fully restore his cracked datapad using the salvaged components from the abandoned residential unit, upgrade his net running capabilities to bypass mid-tier security gates, and uncover the truth behind the suspicious power fluctuations rocking the arcology, all while staying one step ahead of Governor Frederick's paranoid enforcers and Danielle's desperate administrative manhunt. The training wheels are off. The system is watching, the progression tree is expanding, and the choices Adam makes next will determine whether he rises through the ranks of this vertical world or plunges permanently into the dark, flooded abyss below. Inside his private sanctum at the pinnacle of the command spire, Governor Frederick sat enshrined within his massive protection pod, the custom grab sled hovering an inch above the polished obsidian floor. Even here, locked behind biometric blast doors and surrounded by his most trusted guards, the faint, lethal blue charge of his personal repulsor shield crackled continuously around him. The air in the room was cold and sterile, but sweat glistened on his mottled green skin as he fumed over the 1% production drop. His paranoid mind churned with dark suspicions. Danielle had better uncover the saboteur quickly, because if heads were going to roll, hers would be first. She had risen through the administrative ranks with terrifying speed, displacing veterans and drawing the quiet, bitter resentment of the entire leading council. Whispers of widespread discontent among the high officials had reached his sharp, forward-pointed ears, convincing him that a coordinated coup was brewing right beneath his nose. Suddenly, the encrypted holographic projector on his central console flared to life, casting a flickering, translucent blue glow across the room. The incoming transmission came from Sector General Franklin, commanding officer of the Outer Border Patrol. The image that resolved above the deck was alarming. Franklin's flagship was clearly visible, its hull scarred by severe plasma burns, gaping structural breaches, and sparking conduits that hinted at a brutal, devastating engagement. Franklin wasted no time on pleasantries, his voice grim and gravelly as he reported that their patrol wing had been ambushed by a coordinated pack of heavily armed rebel ships along the border sectors. Out of the 15 vessels that had sortied, 10 had been utterly destroyed, and the 5 survivors remaining were limping home with critical structural and propulsion damage, demanding immediate dry dock repairs. Then, the conversation shifted into a dense, highly technical exchange regarding shipboard architecture, quantum drive synchronization, and specialized alloy plating. While the dialogue sounded routine to an outsider, it triggered a cold spike of absolute terror in Frederick's chest. Sector General Franklin was a notoriously volatile commander, a man whose brutal competence was matched only by his destructive temper when things did not go his way. Worse still, Frederick knew the brutal reality of their industrial supply chain. The specific high-grade components required to repair Franklin's advanced warship simply did not exist anywhere within the Arcology's depleted reserves. Yet, admitting that failure to a dangerous warlord like Franklin was a death sentence, Frederick couldn't tell him the parts were missing without inviting an immediate, violent mutiny at the very gates of his tower. The holographic projection of Sector General Franklin flickered slightly, casting an eerie, cobalt light over Governor Frederick's bloated, green-skinned face. The air inside the private sanctum hummed with the high-frequency snap of the active repulsor shield, a pale blue halo that caged the governor within his massive protection pod. Frederick's terrifying white eyes narrowed as he stared at the heavily scarred hull of Franklin's flagship, his mind racing desperately for a way out of the impossible trap he had just fallen into. He knew the Arcology's industrial bays were empty of the quantum-grade alloys and specialized drive coils the general required. Admitting that truth meant inviting a military mutiny at the summit of his own tower, Frederick leaned forward, pressing his heavy hands against the console, and forced a thin, oily smile onto his face. General, let us look at the broader logistical picture here, Frederick began, his voice carrying a calculated tone of administrative authority. Bringing a heavily battered fleet directly into the primary command spire dry dock poses an unnecessary security risk to our core processing infrastructure. Furthermore, the atmospheric congestion here is already operating at critical thresholds. Franklin's holographic avatar crossed his arms, his rugged face darkening with suspicion. What are you implying, Governor? I am simply proposing a more tactically sound reallocation of resources. Frederick pressed on, sweating profusely as his paranoid mind scrambled for a plausible diversion. Planet Sierra Alpha 3 would serve as a far superior dry dock location for your surviving vessels. It possesses deep-crust planetary stabilization platforms, wide berths, and isolated staging yards that will keep your strike wing safe from prying eyes while repairs are underway. The silence that followed was heavy enough to suffocate. Franklin did not move a muscle. His hard, unblinking stare locked onto Frederick with an intensity that made the governor's internal dampeners strain to keep his grav sled stable. Sierra Alpha 3, Franklin repeated, his voice dropping an octave, flat and chillingly dangerous. That rusted, stripped-down rock at the absolute edge of the system? A gravity well with zero manufacturing capacity, zero tactical support, and barely enough atmospheric scrubbers to keep a stray freighter breathing? It is a secure staging ground, Frederick stammered, the oily confidence beginning to crack under the general's blistering gaze. You are hiding something, Frederick, Franklin snarled, the veins in his neck bulging as a violent surge of extreme anger flared through his posture. For the past 20 cycles, every time a border fleet takes heavy fire, you try to push us away from the central hubs. You sit up there in your gilded, cloud-shrouded spire, completely detached from the blood we spilled to keep your supply lines open, and now you want to stash my wounded ships on a dead rock because you refuse to help us? General, you misunderstand the gravity of our current production quotas. Frederick started, raising a hand in defense. Save your bureaucratic garbage. Franklin interrupted, his voice echoing with suppressed fury. I know your type, Governor. You hoard resources while the frontier burns, but I am not some low-tire laborer you can dismiss with a slide deck. If you are unwilling to assist your own military vanguard, it makes me wonder what else you are hiding up there in that paranoid shell of yours. Franklin, listen to reason. I am done listening. Franklin snapped, his eyes flashing with lethal contempt. I will be at your primary docking ring in 5 days. Have every specialized drive component, every plate of quantum armor, and every master technician waiting on the tarmac when my ships touch down. If the yards aren't ready, your head will roll. The irony hit Frederick like a physical blow. Just minutes ago, he had been sitting in this exact chair plotting how to sever Danielle's head from her shoulders if she failed to find a scapegoat for a minor 1% production drop. Now, the sector general was flying straight toward his doorstep with 5 damaged warships and a literal guillotine waiting for the governor himself if the hangars were empty. Before Frederick could utter another syllable of desperate excuse, Franklin severed the communications link. The blue holographic projection dissolved instantly into thin air, leaving the governor alone in the chilling silence of his sanctum, save for the crackle of his repulsor shield. For a terrifying moment, Frederick sat frozen, the blood draining from his face as the sheer weight of the impending disaster crashed down upon him. 5 days. 5 days until a violent, heavily armed military commander docked at his station expecting impossible repairs. But panic was a luxury a governor could not afford for long. Swallowing hard, Frederick slammed his fist down onto the internal comms console, immediately summoning his inventory managing director to the private sanctum. Within minutes, the director, a nervous, hollow-eyed human bureaucrat smothered in cascading data slates, stood trembling before the floating protection pod. Frederick grilled him ruthlessly, demanding a complete, itemized audit of every warehouse, scrap pile, and reserve bin across all 30 tiers of the Arcology. To Frederick's intense shock, the audit revealed that things were not quite as catastrophic as he had initially feared. Thanks to decades of aggressive hoarding and ruthless quota enforcement, the lower and middle industrial sectors actually held a surprising surplus of standard hull plating, wiring harnesses, and secondary plasma manifolds. The bulk of Franklin's repair manifests could actually be met without completely collapsing the Arcology's internal infrastructure. However, as the director's finger scrolled down to the bottom of the master ledger, the blood drained from Frederick's face once more. 2 major quantum drive components, the ultra-rare, high-density magnetic core regulators required to stabilize the primary warp engines of Franklin's Class 4 flagships, were entirely missing missing from the inventory. Without those two specific parts, the surviving warships could not engage their hyperdrives, rendering them permanently grounded sitting ducks. And worst of all, those components were not manufactured anywhere within this sector. They had to be imported from Deep Core Systems, a supply chain that had been severed years ago. Those two missing components meant the entire repair operation would stall out, and when Franklin realized he had been handed broken promises, the 5-day countdown to Frederick's execution would reach its 0 hour. What followed was 5 days of absolute, unadulterated hell for Governor Frederick. The days blurred into an endless, agonizing gauntlet of high-stress crisis meetings, frantic administrative roll calls, and relentless communications calls with Franklin's vanguard officers to verify exact damage reports and coordinate incoming telemetry. Every waking second was consumed by the crushing terror of the impending deadline. Frederick's mood deteriorated from nervous paranoia into a frothing, volcanic rage that sent every servant, guard, and middle-tier official scrambling for cover whenever his grav sled hummed down the corridor. He barked impossible orders, threatened executions for minor clerical errors, and pushed the Arcology's manufacturing lines to 150% capacity, driving the exhausted human workforce to the absolute brink of structural collapse. By the time the final evening of the work week arrived, the 5 days had nearly run their course. The walls were closing in, the military fleet was breathing down his neck, and the missing quantum drive components were still nowhere to be found. Frederick sat in his dark sanctum, staring out past the transparent steel windows at the gathering clouds, his mind burning with a desperate, toxic fury. The weekend had practically arrived. Franklin was almost at the door, the inventory was critically flawed, and Danielle's promised deadline to solve the Arcology's internal sabotage crisis was colliding with this military nightmare. Danielle better have a damn good reason for what was going on down below, because if she couldn't deliver a miraculous scapegoat, a stabilized workforce, and a solution to his cascading failures by morning, her head would be the very first one rolling across the obsidian floor to appease the general. Adam sat alone in the dim shadows of the abandoned residential unit, the only sound in the dead room being the quiet hum of his newly rebuilt datapad resting on the scarred table before him. The repair had not merely restored the device, through sheer intuitive brilliance and the upgraded micro-components scavenged from the console, he had inadvertently pushed its processing architecture far beyond its original factory specifications. The screen glowed with a crisp, stable emerald brilliance, cycling through advanced diagnostics and subroutines whose true depth he hadn't yet begun to unlock. He looked down at the meager foil-wrapped meal of nutrient paste he had managed to purchase using a handful of credits earned by trading away some leftover scrap components to a shady dealer down on level 8. As he ate in silence, a heavy wave of melancholy settled over his chest. He thought of his parents, picturing them right now staggering through another exhausting shift in the upper-tier industrial levels, their bodies broken by decades of relentless labor just to keep them alive. He hated seeing them work nearly to death, trapped in an endless cycle of misery while the elites lived in luxury above the clouds, and he wished more than anything that he could somehow change their fate. Miles away, amid the suffocating crush of workers lining up in a dank concrete corridor for the start of another 15-hour shift, Adam's father stood tall above the crowd. The massive, heavily scarred man with 2 decades of plasma burns etched into his skin was none other than the tall operative who had carried the sleeper device through the service tunnels. In the dim light of the muster station, he caught the eye of a fellow underground contact passing by, offering a subtle, tightly controlled hand gesture to signal that the mission was accomplished and the security system was successfully compromised. The rebellion was moving into its next phase, and he was a central pillar of it. Back in the quiet isolation of the ruined apartment, Adam turned his attention away from his cold meal and back to the datapad. Deprived of any formal schools, public programs, or teachers, he had built his own curriculum through trial, error, and relentless self-education. He plugged a high-density data stick he had salvaged from the apartment's central terminal directly into the datapad's new data bridge connector. The screen flooded with a massive, cascading catalog of information. It was an archived backup library containing billions of documents, technical manuals, historical records, and comprehensive educational courses spanning dozens of advanced scientific fields. As the data indexing completed, a synthetic, localized advisory interface initialized on the screen, functioning as a primitive artificial intelligence companion that he could query, learn from, and interrogate for answers in his ongoing quest to understand the universe. Every educational module he completed, every technical schematic he mastered, and every complex algorithm he solved poured a steady stream of experience points into his progression matrix. His intelligence attribute climbed, his net running rank advanced, and his skill tree expanded, laying the foundation for a future where a kid from the lower Arcology wouldn't just survive the machine, but learn how to take it apart piece by piece. Adam tapped the glowing emerald surface of the datapad, and the interface shifted instantly, shedding its cold system diagnostics to boot up a forgotten tactical simulation program nestled deep within the salvaged data stick. The screen blinked alive, casting a vibrant green illumination across his soot-streaked face. In the center of the display sat an interactive virtual workspace, displaying a wireframe schematic of a compact, multi-role atmospheric shuttle manned for a crew of no more than 6 souls. It was an engineering marvel reduced to absolute scrap. Its exterior hull plating buckled, its port maneuvering thruster sheared off completely, and its internal life support conduits fried into a tangled mess of carbonized copper. Yet, as Adam zoomed in with a pinch of his fingers, he saw that the structural keel and titanium alloy substructure were entirely intact. It was the ultimate digital sandbox for a kid who had spent his life staring up at the stars through a shattered glass dome. Representing Adam inside the simulation was a tiny, squiggly avatar with oversized goggles and a frantically wagging tail. A humorous little sprite he had programmed into the datapod's boot sector just to keep himself amused during the long, freezing hours in the dark. The game interface flashed a bright prompt across the top of the viewport. Hull integrity 12%. Salvage or perish. Level 1 shipbuilding module. In the chat stream overlay that Adam had wired into the corner of his personal HUD, simulating his dream of one day broadcasting his repairs to the wider galaxy, a flurry of imaginary viewer comments scrolled past, cheering on the little squiggly guy as he strapped on a virtual plasma torch and prepared to dive headfirst into the mangled hull. Adam gripped the edge of the datapod, his heart racing with excitement as he took manual control of the squiggly mechanic. Using the touch-sensitive grid, he navigated his tiny avatar through a gaping plasma tear in the shuttle's dorsal plating, dropping straight into the ruined cockpit. The interior detail of the starship was staggering. Every toggle switch, circuit breaker, and secondary manifold was rendered in hyperrealistic technical precision. The pilot seats were chaired frames, the primary flight console was dripping with melted polymer, and the central navigation computer was completely dead. But Adam knew that spaceships weren't about the shiny exterior paint. They were living, breathing machines built on logic, pressure, and power flow. Step 1. Clear the debris. He guided the squiggly avatar over to a massive chunk of twisted bulkhead wedged directly across the pilot's primary flight yoke. With a quick tap of the salvage tool icon, his avatar pulled out a virtual heavy-duty plasma cutter. Sparks flew across the screen in a brilliant shower of green pixels as the squiggly guy carefully traced the stress lines of the metal, making sure not to nick the underlying hydraulic lines. With a satisfying mechanical clonk in the simulation audio, the severed chunk of steel broke free. Adam swiped his thumb to the side, and the squiggly avatar kicked the heavy debris out into the vacuum of space, clearing the path to the flight controls. Step 2. Rewire the auxiliary power bus. This was where Adam's natural genius truly shone. The simulation presented a maddeningly complex puzzle of fried circuit nodes, blown fuses, and crossed data lines leading from the secondary power cell to the cockpit avionics. If he hooked the positive lead into the wrong node, a simulated electrical surge would instantly fry the entire dashboard, sending the little squiggly avatar flying backward in a comical puff of digital smoke. Adam leaned in close, his eyes darting across the schematic diagrams flashing in the corner of the screen. He recognized this architecture instantly. It shared the same logic flow as the air filtration valves in the lower industrial shafts, just scaled up for deep space flight. Using his stylus, he grabbed the virtual wiring harness, routing a heavy-gauge positive cable around the blown capacitor bank and bridging it directly into the primary flight computer's auxiliary relay. He spliced a secondary ground wire using salvaged copper nodes, exactly the way he had practiced in real life with his datapod repairs. He held his breath and tapped the master ignition switch on the virtual console. For an agonizing second, nothing happened. The screen flickered dark, and the little squiggly avatar crossed its tiny arms, tapping its foot in mock disappointment as the chat stream simulated a wave of sad emotes. Then, deep within the digital bowels of the shuttle, a low, rhythmic thrum vibrated through the speakers. A soft amber light washed over the cockpit interior as the emergency avionics booted up one by one. The navigation screens flickered to life, displaying star charts, atmospheric pressure readings, and engine diagnostics in crisp, beautiful green text. The life support systems engaged with a hiss of pressurized oxygen, blowing away the virtual dust inside the cabin. The squiggly avatar threw its hands up in victory, doing a little celebratory dance across the pilot's console while the chat overlay flooded with celebratory fireworks and cheering viewer metrics. Adam grinned from ear to ear, a genuine, unburdened smile breaking through the grime on his face. By tearing down this virtual wreck and rebuilding it piece by piece, he wasn't just playing a game. He was mastering the anatomy of starships. He was learning how engines breathed, how life support maintained its delicate balance, and how a pile of scrap metal could be transformed into a vessel capable of punching through the atmosphere, leaving the toxic gray fog of the arcology far behind. He saved his progress data, sliding the datapod back into his jacket pocket alongside his newly salvaged components, feeling more prepared than ever for whatever the vertical world threw at him next. Text field. Vertical scroll bar. 83 pages. 21%. Adjustable. Checklist. Off. Page 1 of 3. Button. Attachments. Page 1 of 3. Button. Handwriting. Page 1 of 3. Button. New note. Button.
There we are. All right. Well, you know what? Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it. Here, I'm gonna play this video. It's kind of like it's gonna be jittery, but you'll get a good sense of the things we do. And if you want to follow on YouTube or just watch some of my videos, I have like 800 of them. So take a look. I hope you have a great day. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. You're one of my first two people that ever watch my stream, so I'm like jittery here. Thank you. Have a great day.
Jenny? Hello. I'm recording as well. We're going down. Good restaurant too. Let's go down there. Did you want to go walk? Beautiful little spot that we found. It's like being in the islands, guys. Like straight the F up. Right? It's crazy, man. Wow. A marina, a
Probably
sailboat.
could put gas and diesel here too.
Yep.
They have like a little gas station. Maybe not smoke by it.
Why'd you stop right by then?
Further, like
Oh.
50 feet.
Is this the side of a boat?
You can feel how big this trailer is for this boat. Or maybe, oh no, they just pull it in and out of the water. Hydraulics.
This is the boat?
No, that's the thing that they go and push back.
Oh.
And then they'll go into
It's
the
dirty.
water and they'll push it up,
Filthy.
down.
That's my computer's pretty old, so it doesn't encode really well, unfortunately. So, but I hope you, whoever watches this either now or in the future, have a great day. Thank you. Bye.